cup at a time. Tea time. So be sure to grab your tea, grab a seat, and tune in to Miss Liz. Tea time. Making a difference. One cup at a time. Tea time, yeah. Tea time.
Oh, welcome to Tea Time. You know what that means. It's storytelling time and words. That's what we do in this house. We do not serve a beverage. If you do drink tea, yes, you can enjoy your cup of tea as well. That's an extra bonus of tea. But before we get started, we're going to get you over to Miss Liz's YouTube channel. We're going to get you to subscribe to Miss Liz's YouTube channel, and we're going to get you to ring that little doorbell so you can get notified when all these tea times are live. If you'd like to join the live conversation and live stream while we're streaming, you are more than welcome to leave your comments, support, and questions in the comment section. If you would like to stay anonymous and not let anybody know who you are at this time, you can also DM Miss Liz on her Facebook page, and I will get those questions out to our guest today. Today in the house, I have the incredible Susan Carlisle May in the house, and we're going to be talking about her son's story of a heart transplant and the importance of organ donors. We're going to get really deep on that, and then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the other stuff that she does as well. So we're going to spill a good strong tea with you today. The tea today is tenaciously encouraging owner donors and acceptance. That's the tea that we are serving today in the house. So let's get started with the disclaimer, bio, and let me get Susan in here because she's patiently waiting in the studio in the back, and then we're going to spill some good strong tea together. Disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Time live show. Miss Liz myself is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment, please grant StreamYard permission to see your name at StreamYard.com. Please be advised that the content brought forward for any Tea Time show hosted by myself, Miss Liz, is always brought forth in good faith. However, may bring forth dialogues and opinions that are not representative of my platform. The facts and information are perceived to be accurate at the given time of airing. All Tea Time guests and audience participants are responsible for using their good judgment and taking any action that may relate to the discussion. The content brought forward may include discussions for some where they may be emotionally at risk. It is significant to know that this show is engaging in discussion forums only to offer and inspire awareness and connection and is not providing therapeutical advice. If you have any questions about the disclaimer or the panelist discussion, you may freely contact me, Miss Liz, through my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com. Moving forward, should you choose to voluntarily participate in tonight's show in any aspect, I myself, Miss Liz, welcomes you. And should you decide that the show is not made for you at this time, I respect those wishes. And we'll see you at a later show at a later date and time. Again, all Tea Time shows originally dates are Thursdays, 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you see a Tea Time on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, it is a rescheduled, special, or surprise Tea Time. That's how Miss Liz rolls. So now a little bit about my guests. Well, I have the incredible Susan Carlisle May in the house. Susan May love affair with books began when she made a bad grade in math in the 6th grade. Not allowed to watch TV until she brought the grade up. Susan filled her time with books. She turned her love of reading into a love of writing. Her book, Nick's New Heart, 30 Years and Counting, is about her son's heart transplant experience, which we'll be talking about today. Additional nonfiction books she has published are Daily Inspirations from the Unflappable Substitute, about her 20 years in the public school system, and a historical biography. We'll just skip that one. Called a WW War II Flight Surgeon Story is available under S. Carlisle May. Writing as Susan Carlisle, she has completed more than 35 books for HarperCollins Harlequin Medical imprint line. Her heroes are strong, vibrant men and the women that challenge them. She has also independently published a number of romances. She lives in Georgia with her husband of over 40 years, and they have 4 grown children and 8 grandchildren. Susan loves castles, traveling, cross-stitching, and reads voraciously. I hope I'm saying that right. If not, I would get that word out there as well. My tongue sometimes, guys. So let me get Susan in here and let's spill some tea together. Welcome, Susan.
Hey, how are you?
I am not too bad. I am so sorry for any mispronunciation. My tongue sometimes does that.
No worries, happens to me all the time.
So, Susan, I'm going to take you way back. Who is Susan as a little girl and who's Susan now?
Ooh. I don't know that I've changed that much, but a little girl, I was happy, had two happy parents, and excellent parents, and two younger brothers, and therefore I am the oldest, and I still maintain that I like to have control of things, and I'm gonna I I don't want to say an authority. Those are kind of can be in the negative words, but I'm dependable, and was then and still am. So I haven't changed a great deal, other than maybe my hair color.
And what age that happens, right?
Yeah, that just sneaks up on you. Yeah.
So Susan, let's dive right into today's topic, and it is your son's story, Nick's new heart. So let's talk about Nick's heart.
Nick is my youngest of four children. If he had been born 3 weeks earlier, I would have had four children under the age of 4. So I had a lot of little kids all at one time, which has turned out in as they've gotten older is really nice because they're all close and uh, are doing the same things in life. But we had no idea that Nick was going to be born with a bad heart. I had a very nice pregnancy. In fact, better than some of the others. And he surprised us and came with a bad heart. I did not know it initially. Back then, 35 years ago, almost 36 years ago, they didn't do ultrasounds routinely. You didn't get to know, the sex of your child and all of that sort of stuff. So there was no reason for us to know that he was going to have a bad heart. And when he was about 12 hours old, the doctor called me back to the neonatal ICU. He had been moved there because they knew something wasn't right, and told me that Nick, something was wrong with his heart, and that they were going to take him to what was then called Eggleston Children's Hospital in Atlanta. It's Children's Healthcare of Atlanta now. And he went off in an ambulance, and I stood in a window and watched he and my husband go. And I was not released from the hospital till the next day. Went down, and I remember telling my mom, I said, no matter what's wrong with Nick, there'll be other children worse than he is. But that turned out to be wrong. Children with cancer had a better chance of survival than he did. And
wow.
Yeah, when he was, he had his first heart surgery when he was 5 days old. And your heart's about the size of a walnut. So think of doing heart surgery on something that tiny, and vessels and stuff the size of threads. And he had what was called a Norwood procedure, went on and had another heart surgery when he was 3.5 months old. And that time he almost died on the operating room table. And they were trying to go through his side so they wouldn't have to put him on the heart-lung machine. And he wasn't standing in the procedure, flipped him over and opened him up on his chest again. So when he was returned to us, he had an incision all the way down the front of his chest and a long incision under his right arm. And during that surgery, he also they nicked the nerve to his diaphragm, and he spent 6 weeks on a respirator in ICU. And my oldest one started kindergarten that year, and I would drop the oldest one off at kindergarten, drive the 2.5 hours to the hospital to visit with Nick, see him, and then drive home and pick the one from kindergarten up from school. So I did that for 3 weeks. And then when Nick was a year old, He had another heart surgery. And then when just before he turned 2, he received a heart transplant. So that he had a lot going on. At 19, he had a infection on his aorta, which where it's the first place is where they did the original surgery, and had to have a new aorta, and went on to have a heart transplant. And last year, he had a cancer, and it's a kind of only 2% of all transplanted patients ever get this kind of cancer, and it's from taking immunosuppressant medicine all of his life. So we've been busy for 35 years.
So, Susan, what was the name of the heart issue with Nick's heart?
He had a hypoplastic left heart syndrome, which means that you're missing part of your technically half of your heart. He was missing the left side, which is even more uncommon. It's uncommon in general to be a hypoplast, but to have a left side of your heart missing is the most uncommon. And your left lower ventricle or chamber is your main pumping station for your heart, and his was almost completely missing. So he had, out of the 6 heart birth defects that you can have, or major ones, he had 5 problems. He had hypoplast. He had coarctation, which is a narrowing in the blood vessel. He had a narrowing in his aorta, had a hole in his heart, and he also had transposition, which is when your the blood that goes to your body and the blood that goes to your lungs, when those vessels are swapped, he had that as well. So he was of the most severe heart problems you can have. He had multitudes of it. It was completely messed up. Yeah.
So, Susan, as a mom, how did that feel?
Ooh, devastating. When we got to the hospital, my husband took me over into a corner of the lobby of the hospital and told me that Nick's heart was bad, and that he had agreed for Nick to have surgery, which I agreed with him, but that he had, just a very small chance to survive. And it was truly devastating. It just, I had no idea of heart trouble outside of old men having heart attacks. The children to have heart trouble was almost unheard of. There was a boy that had, when I was in high school, that I can remember somebody talking about, said, oh, he has some kind of heart problem. And he was tall and he was really, really thin. But, it wasn't something he talked about. It wasn't something that he showed his scars or, that it wasn't ever really much said about it. And so that was all of my knowledge. And I had to think back to remember that boy.
So how many surgeries, Susan, did Nick have?
Nick's had 5 surgeries and 5 open heart surgeries. Yeah. And he has a pacemaker. He's had, the last time we counted, he had 28 or 29 scars. And he has, and various other, he's had that many heart surgeries, but he also had a jaw surgery. He's broken an arm, those kind of things too. So we kind of take surgery as an everyday thing around here, and that's awful, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. What are you doing today? I'm doing a surgery.
Yeah. That's really unfortunate now that I say that out loud.
But you
So,
have to take the positive side, right? It
oh
happened so
yeah,
much that you had to look at it in a light way, right?
yeah, oh yeah. And people say, well, how do you survive? How did you live through it? No, uh, what was the alternative? I didn't. I mean, you just plug along and do what you have. What you have to do, and that's still what we do. It just you just make the best of what you've got at the time, and I think being thankful. That's it. Just you're thankful for the minutes you have and the time you have, and take them and absorb them and treasure them. That's the only thing you can do, um, because and I think that it doesn't have to be anything as dramatic as a child having a heart transplant. I think that's just what we need to do in general.
Yeah.
And worry less about what we don't have, or how it could be different, and be more accepting of what we do have and treasure what we do have. You know,
So
I'm
Susan, you wrote the book A New Heart for Nick's New Heart. How long did that book take for you to write?
too long. The both getting to writing it and both writing it. I started messing with it, and thinking about, I need to write this book about Nick when he was maybe 2 years old, just after transplant, because I thought, there's nothing out there for me to read about other families' experiences, and I need to be sharing mine with other parents. And then, time goes by, you don't know how to write a book, you don't know anybody else that's written a book to ask, and so on and so forth. So really a lot of time went by from between that and the time I guess Nick was 16 or 17. I had all those kids to raise, and Nick was in and out of the he was six, and having to go to the hospital and that sort of stuff in between there. And finally, a lady moved to town, and I don't live in a very large town. And she started a critique group and a writing group. And a friend told me about it, and I went and I said, okay, it was time. I had one kid who had started college, and the other three at home. And remember, I said they were close together, so that was like four teenagers. So I had reached the point that I didn't care whether they ate or they were clothed or not. That was all their business, because they didn't like what I cooked, and they didn't like what I did anyway. So I started working on Nick's book, and because of that critique group, and because of the lady, I I put together a decent book. Knew nothing about writing a book other than it had words in it and a cover. That was my sum, total. So through that critique group and trial and error, I I started sending out you know, the manuscript. I got lots of rejections, lots and lots and lots. And then I hit on the right small press, and that was the best thing that could have happened to the book, because I got to have a say in everything. And the book is about my family. It's got Nick's name on it, but it's about my family.
Yeah.
And so I put out the first edition when Nick was 18. There's a picture of him in it where he's graduating from high school. But then for Nick's 25th anniversary of his heart transplant, I did a second edition. And by that time, he was married and had a child. And the that one I thought I would just fly through. And those extra 20,000 words, oh no, 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 no. It was pretty emotional, and I'd have to stop and think about it. And so I ended up with a nice size uh, book that with the exception of this most recent cancer issue, is all in the book.
So that must have took you for a real loop, right? First the heart, now cancer.
Oh yes, and I the biggest issue with Nick being sick now is when he was a baby, I didn't know whether do you pray for him to die as a child and not suffer and not become a member of the family to lose him later. And now Nick's health affects not only his dad and I, but his brothers and his sisters, who know him, and his friends and his cousins and his wife and child, and the pool of influence is so much larger than it was when he was just a baby. And so when Nick gets sick, it worries a lot larger group than it did. Yeah, and that does make it tough. The his siblings look to me for how are things, and how worried should we be? Not that they don't look to their dad, but their dad hides it better than I do. And so yeah, that'll always that's going to be an ongoing concern forever. But I worried more about Nick worrying about himself,
Yeah.
and that back to the part about enjoying the moments. I told him, I said, he's worried about his daughter growing up without him and that sort of stuff. And I said, honey, you're going to miss the good stuff if you spend your time dwelling on the bad or what could be, because nothing says that you're not going to live to see her get married, or whatever it is that you're wanting. I said, soak up what you can, while you can, and not worry about the future, so any more than you have to.
Well, as a mom, it's got to be hard, you got to be that tough root for everybody, right? So
Yeah, I think you do. I think you do. I think um, people are not that Nick's dad doesn't is not um, uh, good and supportive, but I think that moms have to have the stiff upper lip for a
yeah,
lot. I do.
yeah, we have to be the root of the tree, right? And
Yeah,
all the little branches, and
yeah.
one cracks a little bit, then we got to get, that band-aid and wrap it and fix it and
Oh
hold
yeah.
it, right?
Oh
So
yeah.
where do you get your strength from, Susan?
Well, God, for the starters, yeah, that's my main source. And my husband and I, we make a really good team. I tend to be the glass half full person, and he says I live with the rose colored glasses, and he's the glass half empty, and here's what they're actually saying, not what I want them to be saying, a lots of times. And uh, Nick is really he likes for me not to worry. So he calls, now that he's much older, he'll tell his dad something, and his dad will know it for 3 or 4 days before I do. They tell me the at the last minute because he doesn't want me to worry about it. And
Yeah.
he doesn't like for me to be, upset. And I will say I tend to know more about what's going on hospital wise and doctor wise, because one thing is I pay a lot of attention to it, even on newscast and stuff like that. But also, I was the one doing all of the medical taking care of stuff. So
Well, Susan, let's get into your tea because the tea you gave me was tenaciously encouraging owner donor and acceptance. Tell me why you gave me those words.
Well, I am tenacious. I don't give up when I've made up my mind. And I think I now when you've got a kid that's chronically ill, I think you have to be tenacious. You have to be the advocate for the child and the advocate for yourself and the advocate for your family. Um I remember the first time I told them at the hospital, and it took years. Now I'm talking about 5 and 6 years, that they told me when to show up at the hospital and they told me what to do. And it was a big deal when I told them the first time. I said, we can't make it that day. We've got a swimming party we're supposed to be. Can we come the next day? And because they at the hospital, they had controlled our, not just mine and Nick's life, but the whole family's life, because we couldn't do something. It all revolved around that. So that, but I am tenacious about what I want. I got, for this book, I had over 300 rejections before I found a publisher. I was determined that the book needed to be out in the world, and it needed to be there, to help others, and and to encourage others, for them to know that you can survive and thrive as a boy and as a family, with all of this going on in your life. And we have done that. So, and encouraging organ donation. My child wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for an organ donor. A family who had another child who was injured, and well, it had been pronounced dead and was dead. That his heart saved my child, and 33 years, almost 34 years later, that heart still beats in my child. And if Nick hadn't have gotten a heart transplant, he would not be alive today. There is no doubt about it. So I encourage people to donate their organs, and that it's a good thing, and it's a positive thing. And some people say, "Ooh, I would never do that." But if you're not alive and your organs can benefit somebody else and save their lives, my child certainly is an example of that happening, and I know many, many, many more like him, both children and adults. And I don't know a single one of them that's not grateful either, eternally grateful, that on that. And for acceptance, I think acceptance is to accept what your life has given you and make the most of it, to find joy in it and be happy, and find the positive side of it, is what I think of with in this particular use of acceptance, and make the most of it. Smile a lot.
Right, smiling to we said this the other day with another guest. I forget what guest was on, but we were talking about just smile through it all, right? Because sometimes life gets so heavy. You just gotta smile.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, you can look around and find things to make you feel bad. I mean, if that's where you want to go, but I being happy is often, sometimes being happy is really a choice, and you can get, as I tell my children, go get happy. I can make you unhappy, but you can go get happy too. And often I think happiness comes from, if you find that you're unhappy, go find somebody you can help, and it will make you happy.
Yeah.
That,
Susan, let's
that
go back to the owner donors. Are you an owner donor of your organs?
I am an organ donor. I was an organ donor before Nick, and my husband was too. So those were not hurdles that we had to overcome. In America, you can put that you want to be an organ donor on your driver's license. But they still will ask the family. The family gets the final word. The license just is an indication of what you want to do 95% of the time. Get and But they'll come to the family, and if I encourage people to talk to their family. That's the main thing you can do, is to talk to your family and tell them how you feel about organ donation and how you would like your organs to be used. In case, and you think that's a gruesome, well, I guess it is a gruesome subject, but the it's like talking about your will or how you want your estate to be done. Just because you talk about it doesn't mean you're going to die the next day, but it's so much nicer for your family if you do talk about it and say how you feel. And I that wasn't even an issue for us in any form about of whether or not having a heart transplant or accepting an organ, or whether or not we could donate ours. And
Yeah.
at one time, I had even thought I was going to uh, donate a kidney anonymously, and that does happen. And but Nick and I are the same blood type, and Nick's doctors encouraged me to keep mine in case he ever if he were to need it.
Yeah.
So but otherwise I would have donated anonymously.
Well,
The
I think those are good conversations to bring to the table, Susan. Is have these conversations. Yes, they're uncomfortable, and yes, they're gruesome, and like you said, you're not going to die the next day, but at least it brings some peace to the family, knowing what you want when you're passing or when you're gone. You know, you mentioned that you can put organ donors on your license, and your family has a say. If you have that conversation with your children and your family members, then at least they know that yes, that is what you wanted. Um, and so it doesn't make it complicated, because I'm sure there's families that will say, well, no, that's not happening, and then you're not getting the wish that you wanted as a living being.
I agree. I agree. And they found that if you do, even if other family members don't agree with it in general for them, but if you want it and that's what you've requested, then they feel compelled for to do it. And I think that's a very I think it's a I know it's a worthwhile conversation to have. And something, and a lot of people don't know the truth about organ donation. They think, well, they won't take care of me in the hospital if they find out I'm an organ donor. That's the furthest thing from the truth that you can get.
Yeah.
And they think it just, you watch too many gruesome movies and or that are just wrong. But the movie part is wrong. But the fact that it says horror flick up there that goes by their, over their heads.
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah, they don't look at the patient and say, oh no, this one's an organ one, let's just get into
yeah, no, 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 no. And there's rules and laws and procedures that are make it as fair as possible, and those are constantly changing, and trying to make it fairer, and
Sure.
how they're done, and it's scrutinized to the nth degree. It truly is. Yeah.
So Susan, did you guys get to meet the family who gave the heart to Nick?
We did not. That was their choice. Things are a lot more open now about meeting organ donors and families than it was 33 years ago. Nick was one of the first 150 children in the United States to receive a heart transplant. So, and an even smaller group was under the age of 2. So we're talking about pretty cutting edge pediatric transplants. Now, adults have been done much longer, but at the time you were allowed to know the age, race, and sex of the donor, and we could write a letter. And I wrote a letter, and the letter was sent through the organ procurement agency in my state, and but that family never responded. But there's not an anniversary of Nick's heart transplant that doesn't go by that I don't say a prayer for that family, because what is a celebratory day for us is a memory for them, and and it's a sad day for them, but we're very appreciative of
Yeah.
them. So, but they never have responded. I don't know that I assume they've read the letter, but they would have had a choice of whether or not they even took the letter or not. And but after I sent it in, that's all that that I got to know about it. So.
So, Susan, have you connected with other family members who have had children have heart transplants?
Oh yeah, yeah. They especially when Nick was younger, they would get the heart transplant children together. The hospital would, and they would also he would go to camp with children that had heart transplants, and I also actually Nick's donor saved two children's lives that day. Nick got the heart, and one little girl got the liver, and Nick and she were friends for a good long time. He hasn't seen her in a while, but they were two children that were saved by one organ donor, and so oh yeah, and it's a bittersweet group to be with, and to know, because a number of them have not lived. They and with those, I had to tell Nick, or he, in some cases, he would tell me. As social media became more of a thing, and but yeah, and I'm still in contact with some of them. Yeah, sure am. So it's an interesting group to be a member of. I will say that.
Well,
On a lot.
it's lives living within each other, right? It's different organs that are being passed on to another child, another family member.
Yeah.
The stories and the connections and the relationships. I'm sure that unless you live it, you don't understand it. But it's that special unity, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And you definitely need it. And that was part of what Nick's New Heart was about. Is that we need to know we're not the only one out there. Yeah. That there's somebody else that's experiencing at least part of what we are, or
Yeah.
and learning from them. Hey, what did you do in this situation? And would you do that again or do something different? So all of that is um, we need that support. You most definitely do.
So, Susan, does Nick share his story?
He does. He's not really. He doesn't as much as I do. But now he doesn't remember, though. Certainly doesn't remember those early years where things were super dramatic, and then not. But he does remember when he had the aorta replacement, and certainly cancer. He he's very judicious about how he shares it. Even at work, he says he'll tell the people that work around him, look, I've had a heart transplant. If you don't see me in a timely manner, come hunt me, that sort of thing. And um, a couple of years ago, he he was in the management program at Walmart, and and all the managers have to take their turn on doing nothing but night shift. And but at night he wouldn't there would maybe be 5 other people in the whole store with him, and he might not see anybody for hours on end. And he had a little health scare, and he decided that was not what he needed to be doing, because he said, if something happened to me, nobody would find me for
Yeah.
hours and all. So he made a job change, which Walmart's been horror. I mean, they're just really been very supportive all along. So and which I thought he was smart to do and recognize
Yeah.
that to for that. But now he would be in a crowd of people and you would never know it. He's not very demonstrative about it. No.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? A lot of people don't know someone's story because they just look at it and they're like, "Oh, you're fine. You're walking. You're talking. They don't know
Uh,
the hidden story right behind it."
yeah.
And the reason that I really wanted to have you on Tea Time when you reached out to me, Susan, is because we need the awareness on transplants and organ donors and stuff, because those are conversations we don't have, you know.
Yeah. I
And
agree. I agree. And I know I can go and stand in a group of people and probably tell you if they have heart problems, or a heart transplant, or especially a group of kids, because I know what to look for. But the average person doesn't, and that's a double-edged sword. It's good to go and not always be that one that's standing out in the crowd or has got an issue. And kids and teenagers especially don't want to do that. But
yeah,
on the flip side, I think I've always taught Nick he had a responsibility to share his story, because it people, they needed to hear it and be encouraged by it and know, hey, organ donation works. And that part he does, but not so much like on a program with you and me like
yeah,
this, as much as a very subtle one-on-one. And they're always impressed with him. Even the medical personnel who have been at it for a long time still go, "Oh wow, really?" And us, at the adult, the adult, when he went to the adult hospital, he said there's a man sitting beside him at the clinic, and the man's just talking and said, "Yeah, I've had a heart transplant," and said, and looked over at Nick and said he was maybe 60 or so, and looked over at Nick and said, "Well, what are you here for?" And Nick said, "Well, I've had a heart transplant." He says, "Oh, really?" He said, "I've had mine for 6 years," like he had really done something. Nick said, "Well, I've had mine for 24." And the man goes, "Oh, the reality, you know, Nick's a baby in an adult world at 35 still, because that's still tends to be an older person's thing to
yeah.
need an organ, to need an organ donation. The that those for Nick, those are kind of fun moments, because he does get to, so he doesn't say anything else, and they, "Oh, really?"
You get that, "Oh wow, really? How old were
Yeah,
you?" Like,
yeah.
and it opens that conversation, right? It
Oh,
opens
yeah,
that connection. And
yeah,
and then you just realize, okay, to 25 years, 6 years, and then they kind of share notes back and forth. When
right.
you get a transplant, there's also a rejection of the organ as well. Susan, was there any rejection of this heart with Nick?
Well, the only time he had any major rejection was when he was 13 years old, and he and I mean, I came unglued, because he had had such good things. But I asked the cardiologist, I said, "Dr. Vincent, why?" now? And he said, oh, it's because he's a teenager and his hormones are changing. And I went, I told him, I said, it's time for me to go through menopause and I got all this other stuff going on. You got to come across with something better than that. I mean, that's not going to come.
I'm not taking a teenager thing.
No, but the next one, they made a medicine adjustment, and and watched it really closely, and he didn't have any other problem. But the thing about rejection is you have acute and you have chronic rejection. And acute rejection is what you have that's 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 years out from a transplant. After that, it turns into chronic rejection, which is not so much your body rejecting your organs per se as we think about it. It is the changes in your body and your heart. In Nick's case, hardening of the arteries, which is an old person's disease. It has started a lot faster with him than it would in a normal person. So he's got 5 stents in an artery of his heart because of that, and takes a medicine because of that. So chronic rejection is what we look at now, or more concerned about than that actual, his body's gotten used to the heart. It's just a matter of keeping those tweaks all straightened out the best we can. Yeah.
So can he have rejections today as well?
Actually, they don't do rejection tests for him anymore. They do heart catheterizations and check his arteries, and that's what they're looking for now. So because you generally don't reject, you die of some other issue instead of the acute rejection. Yeah.
So Susan, if anybody wanted to get this book, where could they get this book?
You can go on my website, which is for this one is susancmay.com. You can go on Amazon and look for Nick's New Heart, 30 Years and Counting. And if you can contact me if you'd like to have a autographed one, and to get one. So, but it's full of pictures and family anecdotes. And this one, on the second edition, I interviewed my children and my husband and the doctors, and for what they were thinking at the time. So a little more in depth from a larger group, and not just from strictly from my point of view.
So Susan, which one was harder to write, the first one or the second?
I think the first one, probably, just because the first back to that critique group, I took in my first few pages, and you would read it out loud, and then they would go through it and make notes, and then talk to you about it. And I thought, oh, I had done such a brilliant job, and as all writers do initially. And they said, is this supposed to read like a newspaper article? And that was the last thing I wanted it to read like. And they said, you got to put a little more emotion. And it was really hard because I always had to keep digging for that emotion. And I didn't want to go to that emotional place anymore. I had already gone through it once. I didn't want to revisit it. So on that aspect, it made it a lot harder. Yeah, it did. And I'd write a little bit and cry a little bit, write a little bit and cry a little bit. But I really am quite proud of it, because Nick was reading it, and he said, I'm reading along and I'm feeling really sorry for this little boy. And I'm wondering, how's he going to make it? And how awful is this? And he says, well, that was me. And and
So
this
you wrote
was,
it in a ways that he could understand the story as well.
yeah, yeah. And this was when he was in high school. So, he knew he had made it out of, at least the first 3 or 4 chapters. He said, after that, I knew it all. He could remember most of that after that. But that initial stuff, and he was thinking, man, I don't know if this kid's going to make it. And I realize it's me.
Well, that's always good when when they read the story and then they get to see your point of view as well, right? And what you went through and the emotions that mom went through. I think it's important to have the parent stories out there. We hear the survivors and the people who live it, but to hear from a parent's voice, it's impactful too.
Yes, I agree. And I tell you what, I think is really good also for nurses and doctors that work with chronically ill children to realize that the part that they don't realize that the parents are going through, and or how parents react to things that are said and done, good and bad. Because I wouldn't trade Nick's health care with for anything. I mean, he had lovely doctors and nurses that loved on him in the hospital, but loved on him at birthday parties, and came to his wedding, and still participate in his life. And so from that aspect, but I can remember that they would read it and go, I didn't know that. We didn't realize that was going on. And so it has I think it has a good circle for everybody,
Yeah.
to
Well, it
to
gives a voice for a parent, right? Especially if a parent is trying to understand their feelings and why they had this frustration and this fear and the anger. Because I'm sure there was anger at some point as well during this time in your life as well.
yeah, yeah. And you would or also why they're feeling that emotionally, or uh at that time, and how just approaching a parent when this is going on, what they need. And so many times that more than once, Nick and I would be at the hospital for him for a checkup. Sometimes we made special trips down, but the parents just needed to see, of newborn babies, just needed to see that Nick was alive and had walked into the room, because that made them think, well, if he can do it, then my child can do it. And that was all they didn't want to ask any questions. They just needed to see him alive and well, that it made a difference for them. So and that's important. But Nick has lived an exceptionally long time with his heart, and uh, the and it he's had his bumps, but he's still ticking. His sister says he's um if they had the atomic bomb, it'd be Nick and the cockroaches. They wasn't going to, he'd make it no matter. Just keeps on.
Since you mentioned his sister, how did the siblings feel about everything Nick's been through?
You know, we were, both of us, my husband and I, real strong proponent of keeping things as normal as possible. And I know that sounds weird after I've told you Nick's story, but um, I I worked very hard for them not to miss birthday parties or do anything that they thought was fun or wanted to do because of their brother, so that they would not resent him. And and I think we succeeded there. Um, because they do not see him as my favorite. They all think my oldest son is my favorite. They, it's this. They're in their late 30s and early
My kids are
40s,
the same way, Susan.
fighting over who's the favorite. And so, and surprisingly, it's not the baby with the sick baby that was considered the favorite. It was the older one. So we maybe have overdone it on that, but they knew they had a brother who was sick that had a bad heart. But we still went on vacations. We still did things. It, I tried very hard. I'm sure it came out of my mouth, but almost never, that we can't do it because Nick is sick, or we can't do it because Nick has to go to the hospital. I would always give some alternative to that. Well, we can't do it on Wednesday, but maybe we can do that on Friday, that type of thing. So so there wasn't any resentment. And to this day, I mean, I don't think there is. If there's anything, there's concern out of them, and the and they take it in stride. That's all they've ever known. So, I guess if he had gotten sick, say when he was, 10 or 12, things might have been different in that world, but they were still small enough and young enough. They were just raised with it. So it's a fact of life for them, like it's a fact of life for Nick.
So, Susan, besides writing Nick's story, you've written many books. I want to get that out there before we wrap up, and let people know that you have other books out there. And we talked about it before we went live. You just came back from Canada after celebrating with the Harlequin. And to share a little bit about that before we wrap up.
I write Harlequin romances, medical romances. You write what you know. And I started out with one medical about a little boy who needed a heart transplant. Imagine that. And I've written, just turned in my 39th. And so I write under the Susan Carlisle. The nonfictions are under Susan May, but the romances are under Susan Carlisle. And Harlequin celebrated their 75th anniversary. And so, and I've been with them about 23 years. So I am clicking along pretty good. I am bumping really close to 50 books. So that's with overall with my fictions and my nonfictions. And you can find me at susancarlisle.com and at susancmay.com.
So before we wrap up, I asked you to give me one word to describe yourself, and you gave me dependable. Why'd you give me that word, Susan?
Well, I was most dependable in high school, and I still am dependable. I'm a real organized person, but therefore that makes me dependable. I believe in list and marking list off, but I generally, if I say I'm going to do something, I do it. So that makes me pretty dependable.
So, Susan, what's your final message for everybody today?
Organ donation saves lives, and smile through it all.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Susan, for joining me on Tea Time and sharing Nick's story and sharing your book. And I would love a signed copy, so we will talk about that after we're done the live. And I want to thank all the listeners and the viewers out there. I could not do this without you. We all do this together. It's teamwork. So when you listen and you share and you reshare and you watch the replays, it's a teamwork. So that's what we do, is we share a team of tea over on Tea Time with Miss Liz. I will be back tonight at 7 p.m. with J.M. Shaw, and we'll be talking about her Callum Walker series books and autism and ADHD and being diagnosed as an adult. So we'll be talking about that stuff as well. So tune in at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tonight. Until then, I want to wish everybody an awesome day, and keep sharing your teas. Keep being true to yourself, and we will make a difference one cup of tea at a time.